Okay, it's time to talk about gear. Fluke gear. We are just weeks away from the season, and I'm so excited to show you in this video what will be in my Fluke arsenal for 2021. I'm going to go over my three main shore setups, and then I'll briefly cover a boat setup that I'm excited to use for the first time. Now let me preface this by saying, nothing is more important than matching gear with technique. Gear and technique. When you marry the right technique with your equipment, it will launch your game to the next level. That means going from catching just the occasional keeper to limiting out on every trip. Now, we're going to cover specifically the single jig technique, since that is king when it comes to fluking from shore. I'm going to break down each of my four setups and the techniques that I'll impart on them. And after that, I'll go over some of the specifics of the lures, terminal tackle, and other equipment that I'm excited to use this year. Hope you all enjoy. Now let's get to it. Alright, for my first setup, I have the Daiwa Rebellion 7-foot medium power rod, paired with my Shimano Twin Power FD 2500 reel. This is my main setup when it comes to fluking from docks, piers, inlets, and any shoreline with the steep drop off. I prefer to fish this setup with a 3/8 ounce jig head, tipped with a 5-inch gulp rub, or a 6-inch jerk shad. The rod is rated to 5/8 ounce with the fast action and fast taper. To me, this rod is great when fishing well above the surface, like on a pier or dock. The rod has good power, and with this taper, it will pop a 3/8 ounce to a 1/2 ounce jig, no problem. However, when fighting a fish, you need to keep generous pressure on the rod, so that it maintains the fish under load. If you're not careful, the rod can lose that load, and you will potentially lose that fish. So when you're fishing from elevations such as a pier, you can create a steeper angle to generate and maintain that rod bend under load. But if you're fishing from the surf, you will lose that vertical leverage, making it harder to generate that rod pressure. Which brings me to my second setup, which I primarily use in the surf. This is a brand new rod that I got late last year, all the way from Japan. It's called the Vagori, a unicorn of a rod, which is made by Graphite Leader. This company specializes in making the finest fishing rods out there and sources premium rod blanks for some of the biggest companies in the market. This two-piece rod is 7 foot 4 inch and is medium power, fast action, and medium taper. It's insanely light and is rated up to 3/4 ounce, but I wouldn't entertain anything more than a 1/4 ounce or max 3/8 ounce. I have this rod paired with my 3K Daiwa Sorte LT, and you can find a review of this reel above. I love to toss 1/4 ounce jig heads, tipped with a 6-inch gulp jerk shad with this setup, and it really shines in the surf where it's shallow. The tip is incredibly lively, and you can twitch or pop a jerk shad with surgical precision. Unlike the Rebellion, this rod has a generous taper, which generates a tremendous amount of rod bend to fight a fish under load. When you don't have vertical assist in creating leverage, you absolutely need a rod that can easily generate that load during the hook set. This brings me to my last shore setup, the heaviest of all three. This is a 9-foot Suzuki rod called the Lab Rack from Daiwa, and I have this paired with the 4K Sorte LT. The rod is medium power, medium taper with a fast action, and it's rated up to 1 1/4 ounce. This gives me an opportunity to toss larger baits like a 5.8 inch Kitech Fat Impact threaded to a 1/2 or 3/4 ounce jig head or a 7-inch gulp jerk shad. The tip is lively, which will allow a swim bait to swim freely, or allow a 7-inch jerk shad to be popped in the same manner as the Vagori with a 6-inch jerk shad. The rod also has a right taper to load up to a big fish caught from the surf. Aside from that, this will be my go-to setup for deeper water along inlets and channels where the current runs faster. In addition to my shore setups, I will also plan to fish from a boat this year, targeting fluke, sea bass, tog, or porgies. I actually grew up fluke fishing with my dad on party boats all over New Jersey and New York. Those were the days when my dad and I can fill up potato sacks full of knot-head sea bass, and I still remember that memorable fluke trip out of the Highlands where I caught my dormite right at the final horn. Thanks to my friends, I'll get to revisit my roots. And with that, I got myself a dedicated boat setup. I have here a Shimano Game Type J bait casting rod at 6 foot and medium light rating. It has a moderate fast action and a moderate taper. It is paired with the Shimano Tranx 300. The rod is insanely light and is really built as an offshore vertical jigging rod, often used in speed or slow pitch jigging for pelagics. and I like to see how it can handle the same application of my short jigging style over to heavier jigs, say up to 1 or 1.5 ounce. I'm really excited to use this setup, and I can't wait to provide you all a thorough review. Alright, let's get to the lures. For this season, my default bait will be the Gulp Jerk Shad, both in the 6-inch and 7-inch. They work great in colder water temperature, like in the early season, but they are also effective year-round, and in my opinion, the most versatile fluke lure out there. When it comes to reaction strikes, nothing beats the Jerk Shad. My cousin and I filmed another video, the underwater action of this lure, when falling on slack line or through a semi-slack pendulum fall. In short, it's a jerk bait, which initiates travel with a random darting action, then a brief pause, followed by a slow sink to the bottom, mimicking a dying baitfish. Often I see fluke pursue the lure during the dart and then inhale it as it makes its quivering fall. And when I see that, it's just showing off how this is a reaction strike, and I believe fluke will hit these even when they're not hungry. As for the color, my personal favorites are the Pearl White, New Penny, and the Chartreuse. However, color is less important when compared to the size. From the surf, I will use a 1/4 ounce jig head because of its relatively fast sink rate. Aside from the jerk shads, I'll also be fishing a 5-inch Gulp grub. These are great on a 3/8 ounce jig head, fished low and slow on the surf. Because of its large tail, these lures have a slower sink rate and can be fished with a heavier jig. You typically want to crawl or swim the grub along the bottom. Think of it as a mantis shrimp. Aside from the Gulp, I'll be utilizing other lures such as the Kitex Fat Impact swim bait style lures. The Fat Impact can be fished like a Gulp grub, either swimming it or crawling it slowly across the bottom. You don't even need to twitch the rod tip. Rather, you can turn and pause your reel to make it swim up and fall slowly back down. And these baits can be your best option when fishing rougher conditions that won't be ideal for jigging a jerk shad. For the jig heads, I'm a heavy user of the Decoy Violence jig heads. These jigs have the perfect combination of jig weight and the hook size with the classic ball head shape. The ones I'm using are a 1/4 and 3/8 ounce jig heads that comes with a 3/0 or 4/0 hook. Now I'll also be experimenting with the 1/4 ounce Gamakatsu ball head jigs with the 3/0 hook. Initially I bought these gammy jig heads because of their availability in the domestic market. The only difference I see with these jigs is an offset collar and a thinner gauge hook. And if there's any downside with the decoys, it's their thicker gauge hook. If you're not driving your hook sets, the hook may not penetrate the fluke's mouth, and that can lead to lost fish. I find that gammies having a thinner gauge can provide more ease when it comes to setting the hook into a fluke. Now let's go over the leader and the braid, primarily for the surf setups I mentioned above. Since 2019, I've been using Daiwa's J-Braid X8 weave in 15-pound tests. It's my default go-to and provides an excellent sensitivity with the supple feel. I prefer the X8 over the X4 weave because of this suppleness. 15-pound test is perfectly fine for me since I'll be using a 12-ounce fluoro as my leader. Now for this year, I'm going to experiment with a different brand of braid called YGK Sol. The line is incredibly thin and has that X8 weave making it supple. Even coming in at 22-pound test, the line is much thinner than the 15-pound J-Braid. Now that I've got the braid covered, let's move on to the leader. I use only fluorocarbon leader, and my preferred brand is Seagar's STS for trout and steelhead. And I like to fish with 12-pound test. It's light enough to finesse jig along the bottom, but tough enough to withstand any fluke. And it provides enough abrasion resistance for any scenario along the shore. Now I also wanted to briefly cover the knots. I'll be using a modified Alberto knot to connect my braid to the fluorocarbon leader, and I'll be using a crazed loop to connect my leader to the jig head. No swivels, no angler clips. In order to get the most natural action out of your presentation, you need to cut out all the hardware. Again, it's the little things that will set you up for success. Alright, finally just wanted to mention that I have a couple of new toys for my video rig, thanks to my girlfriend. First is the DJI Mavic Mini Drone. This is truly amazing for shooting intros and B-rolls, and I find the drone's camera of excellent quality. I also received a brand new GoPro 9, and I bought a couple Polar Pro ND filters to go along with it. What makes this awesome is I took my existing GoPro 7 and made a hat rig for my niece, and now she'll be able to bring her style of fluke jigging on film to you all. And finally, I'll be consolidating all of my gear into the Angle backpack cooler, which I showcased last year. It is a game changer, and you can find my dedicated review of it here. Alright, this covers about all my gear for the upcoming fluke season. I have very high expectations this year from the surf, and I can't wait to get out on a boat to test out my new setup. We'll just have to see how it pans out. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my cousin's channel.